The flight attendant didn't lower her voice. "Sir, this is business class." Heads turned. Emma's fingers tightened around my hand as she looked at my worn hoodie and old duffel. "These seats cost real money," she said, never guessing my ticket was valid, or that I'd once saved a plane at 30,000 feet. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Let's begin. Dylan Sullivan boarded the late-night flight the same way he approached most things now, quietly, deliberately, with his focus fixed on the small hand wrapped around his own. Emma, 9 years old, tired but curious, leaned close as they stepped past first class and into business. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the cabin, "are we really supposed to be here?" Dylan glanced down at her, offering a small, reassuring smile. "We are. I promise." Their seats were only a few rows in when a sharp voice cut through the aisle. "Sir. Stop right there." A flight attendant stepped in front of them, posture rigid, smile practiced but thin. Her name tag read Tara Mills. She looked at Dylan, not unkindly, but quickly, in the way people sometimes look when they think they already know the answer. "This section is business class," she said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I'll need to see your boarding passes." Several heads turned. Emma stiffened, her fingers tightening around her stuffed fox. Dylan felt it immediately, the familiar weight of being judged before a word was spoken. Without argument, he reached into his pocket and handed over the passes. Tara scanned them. The screen flashed green. A brief silence followed, uncomfortable and exposed. Tara cleared her throat. "All right. Go ahead." That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of the moment she had created. Emma slid into her seat, cheeks pink, eyes lowered. Dylan stowed their bag and sat beside her, noticing the way she pressed her knees together, trying to take up less space. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked quietly. Dylan leaned closer. "No, bug. Not at all." Then why did she sound mad? He chose his words carefully. Sometimes people forget to check the facts before they speak. Emma thought about that, then nodded slowly, like she was filing it away for later. As the plane prepared for pushback, another flight attendant approached from the front of the cabin. She wore a navy blazer with silver wings and carried herself differently, not rushed, not sharp, but aware. Her name was Nora Blake. She stopped near their row and glanced at Dylan, then at Emma. Something flickered across her face, recognition, maybe, or simply concern. "Everything okay here?" Nora asked gently. "Yes," Dylan replied. "We're fine." Nora's eyes lingered a moment longer, then she nodded and turned to Tara, speaking in a low voice just beyond earshot. Tara's posture shifted, defensive at first, then subdued. Emma watched the exchange closely. The plane began to move. Engines hummed louder. The city lights outside blurred into streaks of gold. Dylan leaned back and exhaled, unaware that this flight, meant to be nothing more than a trip home, was about to place him, once again, exactly where his character mattered most. And Emma, watching everything, was about to learn what quiet courage really looked like. The cabin settled into its nighttime rhythm once the seatbelt sign dimmed. Soft lights glowed overhead, conversations dropped to murmurs, and Emma leaned against Dylan's arm, tracing circles on the window with her fingertip as clouds slid past like slow ghosts. A few minutes later, Nora Blake returned, stopping beside their row with a cup of hot chocolate. "For you," she said to Emma with a warm smile. Emma's eyes lit up. "Thank you." Nora turned to Dylan. "If you don't mind, may I sit for a moment?" Dylan nodded. "Of course." They spoke quietly, voices low enough not to intrude on the calm they were trying to preserve. Nora asked about the flight, about Emma, about where they were headed. Dylan answered simply, "New York, a short stay, nothing special." But Nora noticed things. The way Dylan scanned the cabin without appearing tense. The way his voice never wavered. The way Emma mirrored his calm. "You're used to flying," Nora said. Dylan hesitated, then nodded. "I worked aircraft maintenance years ago. Anne. I was once on a flight that didn't go as planned." Nora's expression softened with understanding. "That explains it." Before Dylan could respond, the plane shuddered. Not violently, just enough to snap attention back into the present. A few passengers gasped. Someone laughed nervously. Then it happened again. Stronger this time. The seatbelt sign flashed on. Overhead bins rattled. Emma grabbed Dylan's sleeve. "It's okay," he said immediately, placing a hand over hers. "Just turbulence." But even as he said it, Dylan felt something was off. The movement wasn't random, it was uneven, deliberate, like the aircraft was compensating for something. From the cockpit, the intercom crackled. A voice began to speak, then cut out. Nora was already standing. A flight attendant hurried toward her, pale. "Nora, the captain," he collapsed. Everything changed in an instant. Training took over. Nora moved fast but controlled, issuing instructions with a calm authority that cut through panic before it could spread. The co-pilot's voice came over the speakers moments later. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical situation in the cockpit. I am in full control of the aircraft. We will be diverting to JFK as a precaution. Please remain seated." Whispers rippled through the cabin. Fear bloomed in small, sharp bursts. Nora looked at Dylan, not with desperation, but with trust. "I could use your help," she said quietly. "You know planes. And you know people." Dylan stood, steadying himself as the aircraft rocked again. "Tell me what you need." He moved through the aisle, speaking calmly, making eye contact, reminding people to buckle in, to breathe, to listen to the crew. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He reassured. And people responded. Emma watched him from her seat, pride shining through her worry. When a younger child nearby began crying uncontrollably, she leaned over, offering her stuffed fox. "My dad says we're safe," Emma whispered. "He doesn't lie." The turbulence intensified briefly as the plane adjusted course. Nora remained near the front, relaying updates, coordinating with the crew. Dylan stood where passengers could see him, a quiet anchor in moving air. Minutes stretched. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the shaking eased. The plane leveled. Breathing returned to normal. Fear loosened its grip. As the lights over Manhattan appeared below like a sea of stars, Dylan returned to his seat. Emma hugged him tightly. "You were brave," she said. "So were you," he replied. And somewhere between the clouds and the city, Dylan realized this flight was no longer just about getting home. It was about showing his daughter, once again, that character doesn't announce itself. It simply acts when needed. The descent toward New York began gradually, announced not by a sudden drop but by a subtle change in pressure that Dylan felt in his ears before he noticed it anywhere else. Outside the window, the darkness thinned, revealing a distant lattice of city lights spread wide and endless. The cabin, however, was far from calm. A man too rose up, clutched his armrest, whispering prayers under his breath. A woman near the aisle kept asking the same question: "Is the pilot conscious yet?" Over and over, as if repetition could change the answer. Fear moved like a current, invisible but strong. Nora stood near the forward galley, headset pressed to one ear, relaying information between the cockpit and the cabin crew. Her movements were precise, but Dylan could see the strain in her jaw. She caught his eye and gestured him forward. "The co-pilot is handling the aircraft," she said quietly, "but he's alone up there and managing radio, descent, and checklists at the same time. We need the cabin stable." No panic. No movement. Dylan nodded. I'll keep people seated and calm. He turned back into the aisle, grounding himself with slow breaths. This wasn't heroics. This was responsibility, the same kind he'd carried every morning since Emma was born. Everyone, he said clearly, not loudly. We're approaching the city. The aircraft is under control. Please stay seated and buckled. The crew knows what they're doing. Someone shouted from the back, how do you know? Dylan met the man's eyes. Because panic makes things worse. And because I trust the people flying this plane. The words weren't magic, but they were enough. One by one, shoulders lowered. Hands unclenched. The cabin followed the tone he set, the way children often followed Emma's calm when she believed her father. Nora moved again, kneeling briefly beside an elderly passenger, offering water, steadying hands. Tara followed her lead now, quieter, more careful, her earlier sharpness replaced by focus. When she passed Dylan, she met his eyes and nodded, an unspoken acknowledgement. Another jolt shook the aircraft, stronger than before. Gasps rose, then settled as Dylan raised a hand, palm down. It's just the wind over the city, he said. Happens all the time. Emma watched him closely. When the plane dipped, she squeezed her stuffed fox, but she didn't cry. From the cockpit, the co-pilot's voice came through again. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. Emergency services are standing by. Thank you for your assistance. Nora closed her eyes for half a second, then exhaled. We're almost there, she said. Dylan returned to his seat, buckling in beside Emma. She leaned against him, small and steady. Dad, she whispered, are you scared? He considered lying. Then chose honesty. A little. Me too, she said. But I feel safe. That mattered more than courage. The runway appeared suddenly, rushing toward them, light streaking past the windows. The landing was firm but controlled, tires hitting asphalt, engines roaring in reverse, the aircraft slowing with determined strength. For a moment, there was silence. Then applause broke out, tentative at first, then full and loud. People clapped, cried, laughed in relief. Strangers hugged. Someone shouted, "Thank God." Dylan closed his eyes and rested his forehead against Emma's hair. They were on the ground. And for the first time since boarding, the weight in his chest finally lifted. The cabin doors remained closed while emergency crews worked outside, but the fear that had filled the air only minutes earlier had already begun to dissolve. It was replaced by something warmer, relief, gratitude, and the quiet disbelief that comes after surviving something you didn't expect to survive. Passengers turned in their seats, searching for familiar faces, for reassurance that this was real. A woman across the aisle leaned toward Dylan. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. "You kept my son calm. I don't think I could have." Dylan nodded, unsure how to answer. He wasn't used to being thanked for staying steady. It had always seemed like the bare minimum. Emma shifted in her seat, suddenly shy under the attention. Dylan squeezed her hand. "You did great," he whispered. The cockpit door finally opened. A paramedic stepped out, giving a firm nod to the crew. The captain had been stabilized. The co-pilot emerged next, pale but composed, and the applause returned, louder this time, deeper, earned. Nora Blake stood at the front of the cabin and raised her hand gently. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "before we deplane, there's something important I'd like to say." The cabin quieted. "Today could have gone very differently," Nora continued. "It didn't, because people chose calm over fear. And one passenger, in particular, helped us maintain that calm." She turned toward Dylan. Dylan felt his chest tighten. Emma looked up at him, eyes wide. "This is Mr. Dylan Sullivan," Nora said. He assisted the crew, reassured passengers, and supported us throughout the emergency, not because he was asked to, but because it was the right thing to do. The applause this time wasn't explosive. It was steady. Respectful. Dylan stood briefly, then sat again, uncomfortable with the attention but moved by it. Tara approached their row once the announcement ended. She no longer looked sharp or hurried, just human. "Mr. Sullivan," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. For how I spoke to you earlier. For making assumptions. And for doing it in front of your daughter." Dylan met her eyes and saw sincerity there. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. "It matters." Tara nodded, swallowing hard. "Your daughter is lucky." "So am I," Dylan said, glancing at Emma. When the doors finally opened and the jet bridge connected, the city rushed in, sirens distant, voices echoing, New York alive and relentless as ever. At the gate, airline representatives waited. Among them stood a tall man in a dark suit, silver hair neatly combed, expression calm and attentive. He watched Dylan not with curiosity, but with recognition. Nora leaned closer. "That's Michael Grant," she murmured. "He owns the airline." Grant stepped forward as passengers disembarked, shaking hands, offering thanks. When Dylan approached with Emma, Grant stopped him. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, extending his hand. "I've heard a great deal about what you did today." Dylan shook it, surprised. "I just helped where I could." Grant smiled slightly. "That's exactly what this company needs more of." He glanced at Emma. "You were very brave," he said to her. She smiled back, proud and quiet. Grant returned his attention to Dylan. "If you're willing, I'd like to speak with you after you collect your bags. Not as a passenger, but as a professional." Dylan felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Possibility. As they walked down the jet bridge, Emma looked up at him. "Dad," she whispered, "does this mean something good?" Dylan didn't answer right away. But for the first time in a long while, he believed the answer might be yes. The baggage claim at JFK was loud, restless, and impatient, the city reminding everyone that life moved on quickly, even after fear. Dylan stood with Emma beside the carousel, the hum of machinery filling the spaces where adrenaline had finally begun to fade. Emma sat on their duffel, swinging her legs. "Dad," she said, thoughtful, "do planes always do scary things?" Dylan smiled softly. "Sometimes. But they also do amazing things. They get people where they need to be." She nodded, satisfied, as if that answer fit neatly into her understanding of the world. A few minutes later, Nora appeared, no longer in full supervisor mode. Her blazer was off, her posture looser, like she'd finally allowed herself to exhale. "Mr. Sullivan," she said. "Mr. Grant is waiting in the lounge just past customs. If you're still willing." Dylan glanced down at Emma. She shrugged in the universal way children do when they trust the adult they're with. "Let's hear him out," Dylan said. The lounge was quiet compared to the terminal. Michael Grant stood near the window, hands folded behind his back, watching aircraft taxi in the distance. When he turned, his expression was open, unguarded. "Thank you for coming," Grant said. "And thank you again, for today." Dylan inclined his head. "I didn't expect to be noticed." Grant smiled faintly. "People who do the right thing rarely do. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be." He gestured for them to sit. "I started this airline 30 years ago," Grant continued. "Not just to move people, but to build a culture where integrity mattered. Somewhere along the way, we lost a bit of that. Today reminded me why it matters." He slid a card across the table. "Not flashy. Just a name and number." "I don't offer jobs lightly," Grant said. "But we're expanding our safety and operations training division. We need people who understand aircraft, and people. Someone who stays calm under pressure. Someone I'd trust with my own family on board. Dylan stared at the card, heart pounding, not with fear, but disbelief. I'm not a pilot, he said carefully. I know, Grant replied. You're something rarer. Emma leaned forward. Does this mean my dad helps planes? Grant smiled at her. It means your dad helps people. Silence settled, not awkward, but meaningful. Dylan finally spoke. I'd need stability. For her. A future. Grant nodded. That's exactly what this offers. Outside the lounge, Nora waited. When Dylan stepped out, she searched his face. Well? She asked. He held up the card. Her smile was immediate, unguarded. I was hoping you'd say yes. They walked together toward the exit, the city's glow spilling through the glass. Emma skipped a few steps ahead, humming softly, already dreaming in the way children do when the world feels safe again. At the doors, Nora hesitated. I don't usually cross paths like this, she said quietly. Dylan met her eyes. Neither do I. Emma turned back, grinning. Does this mean we might see each other again? Nora laughed gently. I hope so. As they stepped into the cool night air of New York, nothing followed them, no fear, no shadow, no regret. Only gratitude. Only possibility. Dylan took Emma's hand, feeling something he hadn't felt in years settle into place. Hope. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just real. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe for more stories that stay with you.